Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 15 cheat sheet. Apologies once again in advance if you're watching this video and my voice sounds a little bit weird. I'm sick, so I'll try my best to get through this video and hopefully let's get on towards Game Week 15 after an extremely busy week of Premier League football. So I'm recording this video Wednesday evening just to make sure that I'm able to get some content out. So if anything happens on Thursday, plus of course you need to listen to pressers because there's so many injuries, so many rotations that we need to pay attention to. I'm going to give my best guess in terms of, expecting that there's no other injuries in terms of what we know as of Wednesday evening, but, try to take that into account when you make your moves. For me, Semenyo gets a rise. I think generally the run of games is actually very, very smooth for Semenyo. I think that his minutes should be very, very good. No real concerns after coming off from a suspension, so that's why he just gets a rise back to the top. Enzo, for me, absolutely gets to be added to the cheat sheet. The underlyings, I think, are a little bit weird because we know Enzo can play multiple positions, and I think can be utilized in different ways by multiple managers. Right now, he's sort of playing quite an interesting sort of advanced 10 twin role with Palmer, I would say. And the underlyings in recent games have been quite good, but it is a small sample size. And I can completely understand why people still feel like this might be overreading. And I can also understand people thinking that he's an absolute steal and could look like an absolute steal for a while. Because I think one thing that's a bit of a benefit is that I think no one else really in the team can sort of play this role right now in this sort of setup. And I think that he does benefit from that. So that's why I quite like Enzo right now as a pick. And I'm going to add him to the cheat sheet because I'm pretty confident in his short-term minutes. And when you're sort of owning someone at this price point, as long as you actually have maybe 7 attackers, you're sorted. The other picks, I think, slight concerns with, let's say, Ahmad getting benched, but I do think that Dalla was quite a specific setup change when it comes to Arsenal. And I do think that Ahmad should play most of the games where you're expecting that City, like a team like, United can dominate. And I think that's going to be the case with the Nottingham Forest game and the Bournemouth game as well. So I think I'm still pretty high on him as a pick. Buonanotte is suspended versus Brighton, of course, because he's a loanee in Game Week 15. So that was a good flag by someone else in the YouTube comments last week. So that's my bad if I misspoke on that. But for me, his underlying stats this season have still been brilliant. Even in the West Ham game where he was pretty quiet, he still racked up something like 0.52 XA. So just an extremely interesting and direct player this season. And his minutes, you could argue that they could be a little bit more variable under Ruud van Nistelrooy, but I think, he'd be best placed to utilize him anyways. And Leicester actually racked up still a fair amount of XG versus West Ham, right? So if you were going to make the complaint about Leicester this season, I think it's about whether they've been a little bit too passive, a little bit too safe in certain games. And clearly that's part of the reason why I think the players lost faith within someone like Cooper. But they look like a completely open book right now as well in terms of, look at the amount of chances that West Ham got. I think it's a bit unfair that West Ham only scored 1 goal, but you can just blame finishing or whatever. But reality is Leicester gave those chances away. They were at home. So I still think that they look like a very open team, but they might be trading that off with more often. So Buonanotte could benefit in the long term. As far as Rodgers and Jorginho, I'm still a little bit uncertain about both of these players and their minutes in terms of, the ceiling, right? Southampton home is great for Rodgers, of course, but we know that Aston Villa then have 4 tough fixtures in a row. For Jorginho, it's just about, with Minte coming back and João Pedro getting back to full fitness, how many minutes is he realistically going to get to be extremely valuable as an FPL pick, considering he's just pure open play threat. So that's why I think he still stays as a yellow pick. The other picks, I think, are blighted by poor minutes or poor fixtures. And that is definitely, Kluivert in terms of minutes, I think still variable. Even, for example, in his best of games, when he's starting multiple fixtures in a row, I still think Kluivert's going to be the one who gets impacted the most because he doesn't really have that sort of ceiling in terms of minutes, right? Someone like Rodgers is someone who can play, in theory, 55 to 90 minutes a game, but he hits that ceiling of 90 minutes quite often, whereas Kluivert is more of a 65 to 77. So I think people need to temper their expectations with someone who's a penalty taker, and that's it. As far as Iwobi and Smith Rowe, just a fixture issue. As far as 6-point X's, no real changes here other than Eze gets added. I do think that Eze being fully fit and back in the game is a very interesting pick, and I have no issues putting him back in the cheat sheet. Clearly, the next 3 fixtures are not good for Crystal Palace, so there's no real need to really consider someone like Eze in the short term, but definitely in the long term, I think he's a pick to look for. As far as the 7-point X's, no real changes other than giving Mbumo a drop. For me, Mbumo is a drop simply because the underlying numbers are horrific, right? Horrific, but one thing I still like to contextualize with is his underlying stats are not that bad when you consider that other players like Bowen, Rashford, and Gordon are not too far away from him, but he's the only player here who's a 100% penalty taker. So there is still some value here at the end of the day. And I think when you look at his underlyings in terms of a historical point of view, there is that, I guess, proof of data in the past that he can, play better, have better positions in open play. But you might even argue that it's a tactical thing, right? there was a stint, maybe 3 or 4 games last season, where I remember selling Mbumo, and he was very cold in terms of open play data, in terms of how he looked tactically. This is sort of that run once again. I do think it could potentially change, and I'm not too concerned with Mbumo in that I think a lot of people are seeing him as an essential sell. When he's got Newcastle at home, I actually think that's a pretty decent fixture. So I would consider him as a sell for maybe 16 or 17. Probably not 15, though. As far as the next 2 picks with Odegaard and Bruno, I think it's just about rebalancing these two. Maybe I think I was a little bit too high in terms of Odegaard, in terms of pushing him towards an advanced pick and as a green. Bruno, right now, of course, he's just come over a very, very tough fixture in Arsenal, so that's why he just gets a rise back. But with Odegaard, as I said, stepping back into it, no pen share, really poor underlyings, but obviously a very good player, and someone who is, as we know historically, someone who can get a lot of bonus in sort of good game states for him. But I do think that some of the bonus changes this season have actually negatively impacted Odegaard and someone of his quality, because as we know, a lot of the share gets tilted towards, either, let's say, the attackers or people who also do a lot of bonus creating actions, right? And I don't think Odegaard is necessarily someone who's like getting a lot of fouls drawn. He's probably better at that, but he's not also someone who gets a lot of shots on target. So he's not someone who actually is benefited by some of these bonus changes this season. And I think just rectifying that, going to drop him back a little bit. With KDB playing a brilliant game versus Nottingham Forest, and I think the issue is just going to be over a run like this, KDB is involved in multiple competitions. What is he going to be utilized for? You can't play him 90 minutes every match. You can't even play him 75 minutes every 3 days. So I think that, just temper your expectations with him. Son, I think, is actually going to be a very good pick for this run, ultimately. Maybe he deserves to be a yellow, but I still think that there's quite a big gap between him, Saka, Palmer, and Salah, and that's pretty much it. And that's why I kind of want to keep things the same in terms of these tiers for now, because there's a huge minutes issue, I think, still with KDB, even though he obviously has what we call a ceiling in FPL that's very, very good. And then with Son, I do think his minutes could be a little bit more variable. We know that Werner, for example, can be a very good substitute for Son, as he can also be a substitute on the right wing position. As far as the forwards, moving over to that, the only changes to move Delap down, I think the overall Ipswich run is not great. The underlying data is also not great. And I think the available replacement picks are still much better. With Strand Larson, I think he's going to stay green up until, honestly, the end of that Leicester run. Probably, maybe around that Leicester game week, he's going to start dropping. But I think his open play data has actually, started to sort of push up to a higher bound. So I'm pretty impressed with Strand Larson. No real need to sort of rectify him, because I think he's just got better games than, let's say, someone like Delap. And Vardy, I think his minutes are quite variable. So I'm not super positive that Vardy is a great pick over this run, even though he honestly took a great finish versus West Ham to open the scoring. With Raul, it's just a case of 2 bad fixtures. And actually, I think he then suddenly becomes a very interesting pick once again, gaming 17. In the 6.x tier, I'm giving Wood a drop. I just think that the underlyings have dropped a little bit, right? And I think Nottingham Forest, the offense just doesn't look great. We also saw 62 minutes versus Man City, but I think that's because Nottingham Forest, for the most part, were still chasing shadows. And Wood's best chance within that game was literally a KDB assist. A KDB misplaced pass, for, I believe it was Ruben Dias or maybe Akanji, but terrible pass, and Wood actually got a 1-on-1, didn't take it very well, shot it far of the near post, and ultimately I just think, the run is still pretty mediocre. Maybe the expectations set from the markets that I think adjusted to his extremely hot start of the season would have been a little bit too much of an overcorrection. And I do think that he could arguably be a sell. As far as Wisa, I think you don't sell him for Newcastle at home, but you can absolutely sell him the next game week. And he'll probably drop once again next game week as well. Evan Nilsson just has a clean run. Solanke, asterisks around here. But if there's any sort of issues around the sort of illness piece, I think he's still going to be back for Chelsea at home, which I think is an okay game. Not great, but Southampton away, still an amazing game, although we know, Spurs and good games, I guess, don't necessarily mix. Not in a serious way, of course, but that has been the way, unfortunately, the season has gone. Liverpool at home is probably the one tough game in this sort of general run for Spurs over the next 5 to 8 game weeks. So I think if you can consider holding and you don't find Solanke a luxury transfer out, that's that. Cunha gets a drop for me, absolutely. I think the only thing that's the issue with Cunha is when you look at, let's say, all the players around these price points, my only concern with Cunha is I think he's quite expensive for what he is. He did start the season very, very hot in terms of underlyings, but we're starting to see a little bit of a correction, right? I think even when we talk about, let's say, the goal share versus the assist share, he's much more creative than he's a goal threat compared to a lot of the other center forwards within the game. So when we're talking about impacts on bonus, that's definitely going to be reflected a little bit, because any striker who can score a goal is going to quite easily find themselves to 2 to 3 bonus points. Whereas like with Cunha, I guess you can say he's probably someone who's very capable of getting 2, let's say, returns within one game if all things go to plan. But that also is a question of, is he good at other actions, which he is, like at fouls drawn, and he still gets actually quite a few shots on target per game. So it's not too bad, but just keep in mind that he is, when you're looking at, let's say, the combined NPXGI data, that he's someone who's a little bit more tilted towards assists, which also means, naturally just less FPL points, right? So I just think that he's gotten so many price rises that I do think that he's almost, he needs to be self-corrected on the cheat sheet here just because of price point. Whereas Solanke is someone, for example, who's dropped. Havertz is someone that I arguably would like to drop as well, but I still think his minutes are very, very strong. And for the most part, I think he's someone who gets involved in many actions that Arsenal do, right? He's still got good chances, for example, versus Man United in open play. He's still someone who can be a set piece threat for the team. I'm not sure if he's someone who's due for a pity penalty, I guess, when Saka chooses to give away penalties. But yeah, maybe Havertz could arguably be an orange pick, but I still feel comfortable with such a good run of games that he's going to be a 7 point. Like, he's going to be someone who I would still see as a yellow pick. As far as Jackson Isak, I'm no changes there, really. I mean, Jackson got rested. That happens when Chelsea has such an elite team and so many players that you can rest and so many players that also deserve minutes, like Jorgensen and Nkunku, and we saw that. But you're going to expect that he plays versus Tottenham. Not a great game, per se. I think this is probably the worst fixture in the run, but he's still a very, very good pick in the game. As far as Isak, I've always felt like he's probably the second best striker in the game, and we're actually now in a scenario where I think Haaland is so oddly outpriced or overpriced in the context of, let's say, performances, underlyings, and yeah, I think Isak might be the best sort of value striker in the game to play, because in this sort of template structure, he's the one that makes the most sense. And yes, of course, Watkins is on penalties, but does he give you the guaranteed minutes? No, he actually doesn't, right? Subbed off at 63 minutes versus Brentford is not a good thing. Moving on towards defense now. Dunk gets reintroduced to the cheat sheet. I'm going to guess that he starts for this Brighton match, right? Hopefully he's fit and he gets the start, but I think that 15 plus is a good run of games. As long as Dunk is fit, I think he should be starting. I don't think he's actually lost his place to Igor. Happy to be proven wrong. But yeah, I think Dunk is going to be added to the cheat sheet, and honestly is at a very cheap price now and really good value for money. Same sort of logic applies to Hall. I think his minutes have been perfect. When you're seeing that players like Colwill can get rotated, when you're seeing players like Trent getting rotated, and I think Trent's not going to be I will discuss Trent specifically after this, or at the end of this defender section, but someone who can play 90 minutes a game, who gets played as much as possible by their manager, is very important in FPL, particularly in a period like this, and I think Hall satisfies that very much. Pau just got rested, so I think there's a bit of suspicion there, but he should really be playing Southampton at home. Vandenberg, Anderson, Mikolenko. I'm going to give Mikolenko a drop because fixtures start to go poor. I'm not really someone who reacts to, a huge haul. I think, as I said, if you were watching this video last week, I said Mikolenko would drop anyways for Game Week 15, but Game Week 14 was an amazing fixture for him. As far as Anderson and Vandenberg, unfortunately, just poor fixture run for the short term for Fulham, and then I think it turns around, and then Vandenberg generally just poor run. As far as the 4.5s, I still think I've got confidence in Colwill, in Mazraoui, even in Gomez, right? Kwanzaa played so poor, and arguably so did Gomez, but I think Gomez is the one more likely to play center back anyway, so that's going to be that. I think Trent's going to play most of the Premier League matches, so you don't have to worry about that. Van Heck is someone I think I'm just going to drop a little bit, because I do think that these Brighton defensive underlyings are still a little bit poor. And I guess maybe the question is going to be, does he have that sort of overall threat compared to someone like Dunk? When you look at Dunk, his underlying stats are actually very, very good. So that actually gives me the confidence to say that Dunk is someone who probably has a little bit more value in terms of, set piece actions, in terms of open play, things like that. So that's why I'm still a little bit confident in Dunk over Van Heck. As far as the other sort of changes within the cheat here, I mean, Ait-Nouri, you're still going to give him these fixtures. Davis, I still think, is so attacking. He's more attacking than Ait-Nouri, and I think that's just a fact. So I think he's got a lot of value in the game. And Wolves' defense don't look any good. So I really still think if you were to ask me right now, yes, of course, a team like Ipswich are probably worse in terms of XGC, but I don't think Wolves are any, much far behind in terms of how poor their defense is. So when you factor in that Leif Davis is such a good attacker, I mean, that's that. With Lewis, the minutes are still variable, but I think if he starts a game like Crystal Palace away, you're still probably happy with him, but he probably is someone that you can also eye up as a transfer quite easily. As far as players like Guehi and Robinson, just generally poor fixtures, unfortunately, and they'll be better picks later down the line. As far as, let's say, the next tier, Cucurella has been added. A lot of people ask me about Cucurella, but I still don't think that he is worth the money over someone like Colwill. Yes, of course, he didn't get rotated, but I don't think that means very much when Colwill is probably only going to get dropped, one game at a time, and probably, will get additional rest within European matches. I don't know whether Colwill is actually also suffering from something as well, because I think I've been watching a couple Chelsea matches in a row, and he's, unfortunately suffered knocks, and he suffered, for example, I think 2 games ago we saw at the end of full time that he was, struggling with the physios and things like that. He probably just needed a rest. As far as the other picks here, Esteban probably still benefiting from, let's say, some of the defensive injuries for now. He's also been playing really well, so I think that's nice. Porro, in my opinion, gets a drop. Right? I think Vicario actually, I forgot to mention this last week, but I think Vicario getting injured is quite significant for that Tottenham defense. I think there's going to be a drop up between Vicario and Forster. So that's why I think, in my opinion, deserves to drop. As far as Dallo Robertson, boring picks. I've added Robertson. I think Dallow's still a little bit overpriced for what he is, but his minutes have been perfect, and I think I can't even deny that. And he probably, when compared to Mazraoui, is probably the fitter player. So maybe there's an element to minutes that we need to think about between Dallo and Mazraoui, but I think when there's a price gap there, a similar sort of conundrum to, let's say, Colwell versus Cucurella. And I don't think Dallo even that has that much open play threat compared to Mazraoui, even though Mazraoui plays deeper right now. As far as, let's say, the next tier, no changes, but we obviously have a huge asterisk over Gabriel, right? He was not in the squad for the Arsenal match. I don't know what Arteta is going to say. I think you just have to try and read as best as possible what you think, right? A game like Man United is very, very important. But if Gabriel can come back, let's say, by Everton at home, I think he's a keep. If you think that he's going to miss 2 to 3 fixtures in a row, then he's a sell. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. Saliba, I think, is still a fantastic pick, but I'd still prefer Timber first just because of value. Guardiola, he's going to benefit a lot from that Ake injury. And on top of that, Guardiola is such a brilliant player because he's been so attacking and so good at it. And his underlying stats have actually increased this season. So it shows you that also, I think when you watch the Nottingham Forest match, what are the type of positions he occupies? Not only just a left wing type position, he actually moves inverted now and actually is almost living in the box at times within certain actions within the match, which I think is very, very interesting. So I really like Guardiola. I might also consider holding him if the Gabriel news is poor. As far as Virgil, I still think that his value for the quality of the defense and the fixtures compared to Arsenal is a bit worse. So I think Virgil, I'm not going to give him the rise. With Trent, his attacking quality is absolutely insane. And I think he's just going to start the next few matches. When you look at Liverpool's fixtures, and I think, I'm not sure if I can show the graphic, but I think the best thing to do is look at Liverpool's fixtures over the next 5 to 7 matches, including Champions League, including Carabao Cup. The way I see it, you can see how poor the team was playing when they had, let's say, Kwanzaa and Joe Gomez playing. I think Slot's going to realize that Trent is almost essential with Bradley out. The way I see it, Everton, he starts. Girona, he probably gets rested. Fulham, he starts. Southampton, he gets rested. And then Tottenham, he starts again. So I think the way I see it is that to min-max, really, leagues, cups, I think Trent's going to play all the Premier League matches as a starter. I think he's going to play at least 65 minutes plus, and I think that's all you need for Trent to be one of the best picks in the game, and that's that. No other sort of discussion points on Trent. I just think he's amazing. The only thing that holds Trent back is that injury reoccurrence issue, which happens to a lot of players, right? I myself sort of made that mistake, I suppose, when I went Saka to Son many, many game weeks ago, and Son actually just came back from an injury, but then just got re-injured. So that could happen, but hopefully Trent has been managed well enough where he's going to be fine. As far as the goalkeepers, the big change, I think, is Sanchez has to get a drop, unfortunately, just due to that benching, right? If you're a goalkeeper who can rotate, you're in trouble, generally speaking, for the rest of the season. Forster being added is new, but I still think, I really do question sort of his qualities, and so unfortunately, he's just going to be a differential pick for now. As far as Kepa, he's a drop for me because I didn't actually think about this, but of course, he's going to have a game within Chelsea on the horizon. So if you're considering Kepa as a standalone keeper, there's less value towards him as a pick, so he drops. And then Leno actually gets added because Fulham have been such a good defense this season. I'm just reflecting the value of that. And for me, when open play defenders have bad fixtures, that's very, very impactful. It's not so impactful for a goalkeeper, particularly when you consider that a goalkeeper has to be owned for many, many game weeks at a time, and you're probably not going to waste transfers on a goalkeeper. So I think Leno, for a long run sort of view, is a very, very good pick. And Alisson, with that Kelleher mistake, he's probably just waiting to get back in the team, and hopefully he does. I'm not sure whether he's actually fully fit and ready to play, but I think it's a matter of time. So thank you guys so much for watching the cheat sheet. Hope you guys have a lovely game week. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.